Welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast, where we will discuss all things that impact soccer coaching across all levels and ages. Please listen, enjoy, and share your thoughts on the discussions at the Soccer Coaching Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Soccer Coaching Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Scott.
And I'm your other host, Mark.
How are we doing, Mark?
Very good. Very good, thank you.
I was going to ask you how your football weekend's been, but the fact we spent it together, I think I know.
Yeah, indeed, a whole weekend.
With our wives.
Yes, and the kids, the children.
Kids as well.
Yeah, it was very good, as you well know as well. It was a superb weekend of a lot of football. We took the teams down to Bournemouth to partake in a competition. We stayed down there over the weekend in a caravan park.
Your caravan, little one, when I was Scooby-Doo cartoons.
Yes, it was a little bit basic, I think. Yeah, I was highly disappointed.
No expense
especially when I saw yours with a balcony and it was up on a nice hill looking over at the peasant quarters. Yeah, I was a little disappointed. But that aside, it was an amazing weekend, especially for the under-7s team, which Kenny of you coach. So I'll let you do the introduction on it. But it was just an amazing weekend for them, a great experience for the boys, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one of those. So over here we have these football festivals they do over a weekend, and there's the company that organises it doing more around the country in different places. We've done it previously in a different location, but the first time we've done it in Bournemouth, and then obviously the first time with the younger ones.
Yep.
So we had our under-10s, two under-10s teams there, didn't we?
Yep.
That we're both kind of involved in various capacities. You obviously lead on one, and my boys in the other one, and then we had the under-7s where both our boys are in, and obviously I lead that with your support.
Yep.
And 2 days of football for the boys, well, a morning and an afternoon, and it culminates. There's two groups, and the top team of each group then play in a final. And I think aspirations for your team was just to compete, and under 10s was to do the best they can, enjoy the experience.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And I think if we're honest about it, for the younger ones, because they're relatively age group wise, they're a strongish little team.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we had hopes of doing well and potentially getting to the final, but certainly no ambitions beyond that at all. Ultimately the boys managed to get there and played against a really, really good team in the final. They were excellent, I thought, to be honest with you.
Good, yeah.
Physically, big boys for the year, great technical boys, looked like they were very well coached. But we managed to put it together and get a win somehow. Which kind of was definitely the icing on the cake from a nice weekend.
It was a fantastic experience, and there was a lot of people who were watching the game from the other teams, from the local area. So it was a great experience for the boys or the players. And I was just so impressed with how they handled themselves in that final. There was no real nerves. They just kind of got on with it. They worked really hard. I think your focus for the weekend was on effort, and they just, all of them played their part over the whole weekend, and even the final, they all played their part. It was just highly impressive and a great experience for them.
We had a lot of teams come from our little club down there. So we do this every year now. I don't know, it was something like 14 teams or something, wasn't it? It was quite a lot. So obviously, and most of the teams have finished by then. So we had quite a lot of spectators watching, and obviously neutrals as well as the ones from our club. So for the little players, I mean, I was the other side, but it was loud and it was not intimidating, but it was, it was a bit like being in a stadium. I know it was, but it was loud, But I think the important thing maybe is just a reflection, just briefly on learns from it. So I think it was funny because you reflect back afterwards, and the one thing I took away from the weekend was you don't win anything on the day at that time. I think the achievement really came down to all the hard work from probably the 18 months plus previously from everybody, from parents, from the players, from our input, we coach with Simi as well. So, so everyone's involvement, and Lisa who does the administration for us, everyone's involvement in that over a period of time is those marginal gains, which means you can go and compete and play against a really, really good team and, ride your luck at times, but actually maybe come out the right side of the result. which is a fun final. It's under sevens. It's not like we've won the Premier League. I'm not getting carried away here, but you just kind of think, that it shows you actually, if you have a long-term strategy and a plan and you stick to it based on good principles, you can get the results. And my most pleasing aspect of this, and I want this to come through, I really do, because we speak about it isn't about we are not here to win games and get results, and I'm standing by that. What we did through the tournament was every single player played equal playing time. Yep. Every player took their turn in goal equally. Every player played front and back equally. Yep. We had 4 rotations, and that's what I'm proud of, that we didn't compromise on that one little bit. All the boys did their bit at the right times, and we stuck to it, and we still managed to get, have a really great weekend and get through the final, but also sticking to the principles of how we play our football.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think we played teams that were either set up just around one player. It could have been an academy player. It was all about that player. We played teams that had a permanent goalkeeper, and he was, or he or she were a proper goalkeeper. You could see the way in their handling and the way they kind of moved and things like that. That was their job, and that was it. And as you said, you had different goalkeepers every half, every match, and it was very, very impressive, I think. And it was a win for development, I think.
Well, it is nice. I know it sounds crazy, but it is nice when you kind of feel like you do the things for the best intentions for the players for the longer term, but you also know that makes it harder in the short term to get a result. But you kind of say the result's not important. But we're sports people. You still want to win, and that's okay. But you don't want to sacrifice the result for the development. So when you can do both, when you can keep the development as the priority, but also get the win, well, it does feel extra special. I'll be honest with you, it really does. And I'm so proud of the players for doing everything that they did, and and it made it a great weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one note, one of my other highlights of the weekend was the RC team won their first game as well.
Yes,
which was brilliant
the
for
under
them,
7
right?
season.
Superb.
It really was.
It's probably been a hard season, and hopefully they'll start to see the kind of benefits of the work that they're putting in there as well.
And it's important to say, with the A, B and the C team, they're following the same philosophy. Yeah. It's a bit easier for us to do it with an A team and the players that are at. So when you've got B and C team players, you're asking these difficult things to do, and they're only B or C team players because they probably haven't played as much football as some of the other boys. That's the only difference. It's not they just need more game time and more opportunity to kick a ball and stuff. So they'll get better. But yeah, definitely. And I think the celebrations were quite full on when they won. But so the opposition team, it wasn't about them beating them. It was just the fact it was their first ever win. So,
exactly.
But today's episode, we are going to shut up for a little bit now, and we're going to let the listeners listen to an interview from a week or so ago that I managed to do with Michael Hamilton. He's the head of coaching at AFC Wimbledon Academy. Top guy, really good, loads of experience. The club itself has a rich history, kind of an underdog fighting spirit, kind of Phoenix from the Flames kind of stuff on several occasions. Won the FA Cup famously back in the 80s against Liverpool. But it's a great interview. You've listened to it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it again.
You are slacking.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, but it's a great interview. Again, I'm gutted I wasn't able to be there, but it was a superb interview.
Well, what we'll do then is we'll stop now. Yep. We'll have a listen, and then we'll get back together and chat through it. Sound good? Yeah. Okay. And I'm delighted to say I have a wonderful guest with me today, Michael Hamilton from AFC Wimbledon. How you doing, Michael?
Not too bad, thank you.
What listeners don't know is we spent the last 2 hours talking about football already, so we've kind of done the podcast. So we're going to have to go over some of the ground again, if that's right with you.
No problem.
Thank you so much for letting me come along today and see you. I've been privileged enough to have a little walk around the facilities here, which are fantastic. Great to see. You get a sense straight away from the kind of spirit and the culture of the place just by speaking to you, but also just being around the place and what it's all about. So I appreciate that. I've did a bit of research before we saw you today, and I've also heard you speak on other things before. But some of our listeners might not know who you are, Michael. Do you mind giving a bit of background to your coaching background, really, I guess, up to this point?
Yeah, of course. As you know, I'm currently head of coaching here at the academy, and I've been in my role since 2017. Previous to that, actually, no, probably be better if I start from the beginning. So from 2006, 2007, I was at Millwall, and I was working in the foundation phase in the academy, so working with the 7s to 11s, assisting, learning, and just helping out where I could. I then became an official academy coach at Millwall, And alongside that, I kind of knew that if I was going to try and make it in this industry, you know, which is a very tough industry, I would need some experience with the older age groups. So in 2008, I contacted Wimbledon and I offered to volunteer my time for free as long as I could work with the older age groups. So in 2008, I came in and I worked with Mark Robinson, who done the under 18s and who still does the under 18s, and I assisted him for a little while. Just so happened after a couple months, the end of season was approaching and they were planning for next season, and he offered me a role for the following season, which I accepted, more than happy to accept. And for 3 seasons, from 2008 to 2011, I was part-time Millwall, part-time Wimbledon, which at the time was fine because Wimbledon weren't a professional club. They were still working their way up for the non-league. And in 2011, when Wimbledon went up into the Football League after beating Luton in the playoff final, in the conference playoff final, I became full-time at Wimbledon.
A couple of questions then. Why Wimbledon and why the older age groups?
Why Wimbledon? I live in Wandsworth, so it's a local club to me, and it was quite clear from years ago, you know, with the story and the backstory of the club, that, you know, it was a group of people and a club that was on its way up. So at the time, I think they were Ryman Div 1 or maybe Ryman Prem, but it's very clear that they were going places. They were local to me, and, you know, I never knew or anticipated there'll be a professional club sitting there now, but it was quite clear they were going to definitely make their way up through the non-league pyramid, and you know, I'm very proud and I'm very privileged to have been part of that. So, you know, it's pretty clear from the outside that they were going places. Yeah,
it seems quite insightful on your part to kind of see that journey ahead of the schedule, kind of, because it's planned out that way, hasn't it? But you obviously were quite smart enough to see, actually, if I get on this ship now, it might be a good place to be for my own development.
Yeah, in hindsight, very fortunate, you know. Like I said, depending on who you ask, I don't think anyone knew it was going to become a professional club. There were obviously some people who, you know, they were going to make it happen. But from the outside looking in, they were going places. Conference, as you know, the conference is a tough league to get out of, and the playoff final. I remember being there in Manchester, and it was very nerve-wracking. Went down to penalties, but it just, just the story made sense. You know, I remember Danny Kedwell smashing home the penalty, and it was just like, it was all in the story. It's Wimbledon, and that sounds silly, but you know, it was kind of written. So no, I'm very privileged and proud to have been part of the club since before it was a pro club, and I've been proud to be part of the journey, really.
Well, we'll come back to you a bit later on, if that's okay, because it feels like, having spoke to you for the last hour or so before we put the podcast on, that there's definitely a correlation between you as a person and the club that you're at, I think would be fair to say. But we'll come back to that. But also just the older age group then. So obviously you're working with Millwall at the foundation phase, and then you come to Wimbledon, you're keen to get those older age groups. Is that because of your own coaching preference, or was that to do with the coaching badges, or is that just for experience?
Just experience, if I'm honest. I didn't anticipate, a couple of years later I'll be leaving Millwall to become full-time Wimbledon. At the time, I'm very privileged to the experience and time I had at Millwall, and I was enjoying my time. It was purely just for experience and just to try and upskill myself, working with different age groups. I was a young coach coming up, and I just wanted to learn. And it just so happens, Mark Robinson is and was in charge of the under-18s at the time, and in terms of having a massive influence on me and working under someone, it just all worked together, and Mark is a very talented, quality coach, and I'm very fortunate and was fortunate to work under him.
So your current role then, Michael, at Wimbledon, what do you do now?
So I'm currently head of coaching. So if I go back a bit, it's probably a bit easier. So from 2011, I was under 18s assistant and worked with one of the age groups. So under 13s, under 14s, and I've done that for a couple of years. Around 2013, 2014, I become lead youth phase coach, which basically means I looked after the under 13s to under 16s. So I was responsible for getting the under 16s ready for their scholarship years at under 18s and looking after that phase. And then in 2017, since 2017, I've become head of coaching at the club, which basically means I look after the player and coach development programs. I no longer look after an age group. I oversee the age groups plus the coaches. So it's a slightly different role than what I anticipated, but it's one I'm enjoying and I'm learning from, and it's going well.
I'm from London originally, so I know Wimbledon's history pretty well. Yeah. And it has a reputation around its values and philosophy, I guess, and its whole culture. How would you describe the values and philosophy around Wimbledon and the style of the club?
The style. I think everyone knows what the style is, rightly or wrongly. We talk a lot about the 1988 FA Cup final when we beat Liverpool, and I know it sounds silly, but I think that really, encapsulates what Wimbledon's about. You know, it's never say die. It's never know when it's be. It's winning against all odds. You know, and at the time they played Liverpool in the cup final, who was like the equivalent of Man City today. And you know, it was Wimbledon were never going to win it. It was a matter of how low can they keep the score. You know, and they went and won it. And I think that kind of epitomises the Wimbledon culture and the values. The club never knows when it dies. It never takes no for an answer. And there's been many little milestones in the re-emergence of the new club that kind of highlights that as well. You know, like I said, the club. You know, if I'm honest, I think the club they kind of knew they were always going to go through the non-league pyramid up to a point. But then the playoff final against Luton, another established ex-league side at the time, it kind of all just made sense. You go back a couple of years ago when the club, they were in a relegation dogfight in League Two, and they stayed up last day of the season. And now we're in another relegation dogfight. We've got 2 games left, and I won't be surprised if touch wood we stay up.
Yeah,
I think it's just the Wimbledon story. Even against all odds, they always find a way.
Okay, so back to you then a little bit. It does kind of feel like that's a bit like you as a person. You kind of do you think you've gravitated towards the club and been as long as you have because of your values and your philosophy mirrors in with that, or is that kind of Wimbledon's taken you over and kind of merged you into who you are?
I think it's a combination of the two, if I'm honest. I think it's a combination of the two. I've been here for many years, and I've been part of the academy before it was an academy. So there's no doubt that I really understand and I've really embodied what the club's about, and it's the first result I look for on a Saturday. I am a Wimbledon fan now. So I think it's definitely a combination of the two. Don't get me wrong, we've been to and we go to bigger and what's deemed bigger and better clubs. But I don't know, as you've seen here, we haven't got a lot, but what we have got, we're proud of. What we have got, we make it work and we try and maximise its potential. And, we feel sometimes the places you go to, the more they have, the less they actually do. Whereas here, we have less, but we feel like we do more. So, no, I think it's a combination of the two.
How important is that philosophy, that value, that history that you've got at the club in how you approach the coaching?
Massive. And not only the coaching, the players also. I think it's been well established over the last few years. I think there's been a slight change in the tide, but it's been established over the last few years that I think academy football to a level has kind of bred or gave players bad habits. Too comfortable, little resilience, little robustness. Feel like to a degree things should be given to them and a little bit of privilege. And I feel our values and our story, we're massive. When we recruit players, we make sure we educate them on the history and the culture of the club. We've had players who have been released from, Cat 1s or so-called bigger academies. And, I've spoken to parents and players, and they've been really surprised by the rawness of our environment and rawness of our club. But they kind of appreciate it. They kind of see that, this is a little bit more real. And that's no disrespect to any other clubs, because, like I said, I think over the last 18, 24 months, people have seen, hold on a minute, yes, we're achieving in this area, but, we may be lacking in this area. So I think there's been a slight change. But we're massive on upskilling and educating the players on the culture and the values of the club. The parents, I'd hate, and I've never heard, but I'd hate for someone to leave us and say bad stuff about us. I think they really appreciate what we try and instill in the players. And it's important for the coaches as well that they understand the culture and the story and the vision of the club also. They work with the players day to day. And what you find, like I said, we have had coaches and staff members leave and go on to other clubs, but they always talk very fondly of their time here. And I think that, that says a lot. Yeah,
definitely. I do wonder if you had some kind of bonanza investment, say £1 billion invested here, whether or not you'd be able to keep that same kind of resilience and that determination in the players and that focus if you had the facilities that some of these Category 1 academies have, whether that would be a challenge, a part of the way you produce the players you do, and the success you have, particularly around that character side of players, is because of actually you do things probably with slightly less resources in some clubs.
Yeah, and like I was saying to you earlier, I think sometimes you can grow your staff members, for example, you can grow your departments, and you can grow this And the next thing you know, you turn around and you've got a lot of people, and it's very difficult to maintain and grow a culture, and to keep true to your values with the more people you got. So even though you're doing more, not necessarily it looks like you're doing more, you're not actually doing more. And I think there is a massive message in doing more with less. And our story and history of the club won't allow us to deviate from that. So we're always evaluating and reviewing and looking at where we're going. And don't get me wrong, we have made some mistakes along the way, but it's a lot more difficult to keep true to your identity and your culture if you're growing all the time. And if you've got people in the building who don't understand and appreciate where you've come from.
Well, on that note then, I'd like to talk about players in a bit and try and relate us back to, I know a lot of listeners work in that kind of grassroots recreational space, so we want to make it relevant to us and to them. But before we do, just generally about the coaches, because obviously a lot of your job now is working with the coaches here and supporting their development. Yeah. So I guess, firstly, what do you look for in the coaches you bring in? And then how do you support them to kind of ensure that they're doing things the way in which you feel meet your values?
We're kind of guided by, audit and EGLP to recruit coaches that are qualified to a certain level, that level being UEFA B, plus, somewhere down the line with their youth modules. But what we found, you get more, that's important, but what we try and invest in and what we try and recruit and find potential in is not necessarily a bit of paper that says you're UEFA B or UEFA A coach, but more the person. So some of our biggest success stories have been, maybe working and developing coaches who at the time aren't deemed qualified enough, but because they've got a growth mindset, they want to learn, they want to soak up knowledge, ask questions and keep improving. You get more output with those type of people. So we invest in the person first. It's not a coincidence that a lot of us here have been here for a few years, so you've got Jamie Sauer, Academy Manager, Mark Robinson, Head of Football. Mark's been here, I think, 12 years, Jeremy 11, me just under 11. Plus you've got other good staff members, Jenna Richard, for example, she's been here 7-8 years. Rob Tuvey, Lee Juface, he's been here 7-8 years. So, we've got good people here who aren't standing still, who aren't happy, with what they've achieved, but also always looking forward, want to improve. So the person becomes before the coach. I've seen a lot of good quality coaches who are qualified on paper, but when you've got them in, they're a little bit stubborn. Naturally, and they don't want to. I'm not saying they think they know it all, but yeah, they think they know it all.
Set in their ways, maybe.
Yeah, very much so. And that in itself creates its own hurdles. And it's important, and we get more output with the people. You employ the people, you see potential in the people, and with the right people in the building, you can grow. Yeah,
I guess it's a bit like the players. You're only good as your team, right? If you've got the right coaching team, then you're going to be great, and if you haven't, it's going to be harder work.
Exactly. And like I said, we've been here a long time, and we have made mistakes along the way, but we're very proud of where we come from. We've been together a long time, but one thing we're never happy is standing still. And we're always reviewing, reflecting, going again. But I'm not saying it because I'm sitting here, but we have got a growth mindset in the building, and we all contribute differently, but we all pull in the same direction.
Yeah, that's the key thing, I guess, isn't it? If you were watching a new coach come in, maybe you've got them in for a trial session to see, be interested to know what would be kind of the little alarm bells in your head if you saw a couple of things and think, I don't want to see that. Also, maybe a couple of things that's really great. And I know it's hard because everyone's a bit different, but just as a few definite no-nos and a few...
People ask, what is coaching? So my role now is also coaching coaches, and I used to coach players. I still do coach players. But I think I think what coaching is relationships, So I think yeses would be how they interact with players, how players respond to them, how they get their messages across. And, do players leave a session at the end of it, having learned, having, worked hard, and having felt like they've been training with someone who is aiding and supporting their development. And that's irrelevant of what the session is. It could be a shooting session or possession session, whatever it is. There are always outcomes in different sessions, but I think ultimately it's about how a coach gets a message across. And if a player enjoys himself, feels like he's worked hard, feels like he's been developed, and feels that that he's in a safe environment. No-nos would be, bus queues. I think it's with a bit of planning, a bit of organisation, you can always break up a session and redesign a session to make sure boys are always getting enough repetition and goes, or girls, that is. but no-nos will just be bus cues. Apart from that, opposed, technical, unopposed, possession, small-sided games. There's many ways to achieve an outcome. I don't really look at what the session is. Of course, they need to know why they've done what they've done, and it needs to be planned. But I think it's about relationships and how they interact with the kids.
And so, if we look down here at what you do and the coaches, then do they follow a syllabus? I mean, and are those sessions planned out by you and they deliver them? How does it work in practice?
We're currently in the middle of redesigning the program. So I'll tell you how it currently is. How it currently is we work in 6-week blocks, and at the end of every 6 weeks, players get reviewed by the coaches on their performance, on their progress, and they get set targets. What the 6-week covers, we've changed it slightly, but what the 6-week covers is our 4 principles of play. So the current principles of play with the academy is high tempo effective football, counter-attack, making play predictable, and aggressive pressing. So how that works over a week would be each session has got a theme, so high tempo effective football, building through the middle third, for example. And we work within the cycle of football, or the flow of football, we call it. So we work it. So if you're in possession one session and you have an in-possession focus, your next session will be transitional, as if you just lost it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And your next session would be as if you've just won it back. So we call it the flow of football. And the reason we work like that is because previous to that, you would have a theme for 6 weeks, or you'd have a theme for such a long time that it didn't look like the game. There's never been a game of football where you're in possession 100% of the time. It doesn't work. So it was a little bit unnatural. So we redesigned it a few years ago, and each session has a theme which follows on from the previous session, but also sets precedent for the next session. It covers the 4 principles of play. But we're currently in the middle of rewriting the program. Reason being is because the problem with curriculums are good and it's a framework to work within, but each player progresses and has different individual needs. And we feel with a rigid curriculum, yes, you might have good outcomes, but you also lose a lot. Yeah. So we're currently redesigning the program where there's going to be a framework to work within, but the coaches are going to have a bit of freedom to pick and choose what they feel is applicable based on who they're working with and where their team's at the time.
Okay.
Development isn't linear,
No.
And different players need different things. And ultimately, the people who should know the players the best are the coaches. So it doesn't make sense that the coaches are then guided by a curriculum where they then have to implement on players who for some it might not be relevant for. Yeah. If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So the idea being that the new design is a bit more flexible in how they approach the sessions they deliver and what those individual players do within those sessions.
Of course, yeah. And we're massively leaning towards. It's difficult because there has to be a curriculum and there has to be a framework, but we're trying to gear it more towards it being very player-centered, and we're trying to develop. We're in the beginning stages of it, and we've done a lot of good stuff, and we've got plans to do more. But at the end of it, we want players to become self-managing athletes. So we want them to come away with it having contributed and understanding, where they are, what they need to do. So just to give an example, Mark Robinson, he currently alongside James Oliver Pierce, who's assistant, he sent the under-18s team at academy football to a game with no coaching staff at all. So they played Leyton Orient and they drew 2-2, I believe it was. But there was no coaching staff at all. So that was...
It's because they wanted 2 things about the coaching staff, couldn't it?
yeah. They might have lost, you never know. Yeah. But ultimately, the result is the result, and that wasn't the be all and end all. But the most important thing was, the process. So leading up to the game, Mark and James, they done a lot of sessions where boys were able to stop a session if they sensed something was wrong, and coach other players, coach their peers. In team talks and stuff, they'll get themselves in and review themselves, and bit by bit, the coaches just stepped away, and they tried to impart this this power to the players where they were managing themselves. And I remember Mark pulling me in and saying, "Mike, I've got this idea. Look, I'm going to send the boys to a game, and I'm not going to be there." And I was like, "Fair play to you. It's you're going to get
the afternoon off."
Yeah. Well, you got planned that day.
Did they tell the players it was going to happen, or did they just...
No, so they did, yeah, but they gave the players the responsibility to pick the game. So when they felt they were ready for it, so they didn't say, right, on this day you're going to turn up and we're not going to be there. They gave players the opportunity to pick the game. So the outcomes from it, so to give you an example, was the coach. So the boys got onto the coach and they made their way to Orient, and I think the coach took the wrong bend. So some boys were on the coach and some boys were already at the venue. But what straight away happened, because the coach had took the wrong bend, it delayed the coach getting to the venue. So then what the boys on the coach started doing was ringing the boys at the venue to let them know, look, we're a little bit delayed, you need to get this ready, that ready, bang, bang, bang. So they started organising and managing themselves, which is, that was the whole point of it, really. So they started ringing the boys at the facility already. Look, you're going to have to set this up, that's up, look, we're 10 minutes away. So they're managing, they're organising. The coach turns up, things were set up already. During the game, I think they were 2-1 down. They got a last minute equaliser, which kind of makes it all better. Yeah. But they made their own subs. They took their own team talk. They had 2 or 3 boys on the touchline who were trying to get messages out to players and stuff. And like the result, it's good the boys never lost, because if the boys lost 6-7-8-0, you've got to deal with that. If the boys won 6-7-8-0, you've got to deal with that because the players think they know it all. Yeah. So the result kind of, I think it was the best result at the end. But it was the process that was the most important thing, which is, look, at the end of the day, if you achieve your dream, you're going to go and perform in front of thousands of people. You might have a manager on the sideline who might be trying to get instructions to you, but ultimately you're not going to hear them, At the top level, the best players are able to sense and feel what's happening and make decisions.
I reckon, okay, the result obviously was the last minute equaliser is fantastic. What wouldn't have been taken away is all those lessons and those learnings in that experience. No,
absolutely. And that's what it's about. The more we can kind of make ourselves detach ourselves away from the situation, the better. Yeah. So I look after position specific. I look after the defenders. So I look after the position specific program here. And to give you an example, I had the players that had to present to me who their role models were, players that they look up to. So they, Virgil van Dijk and Marcelo. So they all, and then I said to them, I want you to plan a session that either is going to develop us or you guys on that player's strength, or he's going to develop that player on his weakness, if that makes sense. So I want you to identify something that needs to be worked on, and I want you to design a session for it, and I want you to give me your reason why, and then what you're going to do is you're going to go and deliver the session. So we've just started that process. Now, like I said, is the session better than the session I could put on? Probably, do you know what I mean? But it's not about that. What it's about is the boys trying to take apart a part of the game, look at what needs to be done, trying to put it together, and them just all buying into and understanding that, what they do on their own as individuals and how they manage themselves is ultimately going to lead to where they get to. So we're going to review. We've only done that a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to review it and go again. And we've got a few more boys who have still got to deliver sessions, but it's just about imparting power and knowledge to the players to let them know, look, this is your program as much as it is ours. We are just there to help and aid your development. Ultimately, what you put in is what you'll get out of it. And it's it's not a coincidence. All your top performing athletes, or even sports people or successful business people, it's what they do when no one's looking, which reaps the rewards. And that's the message we're trying to get across to them.
So it sounds like player ownership is going to be a big part of this plan.
Massively. We see ourselves as, we are there to facilitate and to aid and support, but it can't be centered around the coach. It can't be centered around us. It has to be centered around the player and their needs. So I've had, going back to the process I'm going through, the boys have identified to me areas that they want to work on. Yeah. So instead of me saying, right, this is today's session and we're going to work on this, and they've come to me and said, Mike, I want to work on my speed, I want to work on my heading, I want to work on recovery runs, whatever it is. And the session is designed around that, but it's their contribution that makes it all worthwhile. And like I said, it's all development.
Why is that player ownership so important to you? Why do you value it so much? I mean, I'm on your page, but I just want to, why do you see it so important, and how does that then transfer into ultimately their individual and team outcomes?
Good question. I have this discussion all the time, and I think I'm going to say something a bit controversial here, possibly. I think individual, if we had the mindset, if we can coach our players in a team sport to have the mindset and the application of an individual sports person, I think there's so many percentages that we're not currently hitting. So I don't know. So Anthony Joshua, for example, he's preparing for a fight, and Jarrell Miller's just pulled out, so he's got, he don't know who his next opponent is. But if he allows that to detach himself from the mission, from what he's looking to achieve, then he can very easily lose his next fight, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So he's got to manage himself and go through that process to make sure whoever steps out and fights him in July the 2nd or whatever it is, that he's ready for it. And we found the individual sports people have a different mindset and a different attitude and application to team sports. I think in team sports you can hide behind people and you can hide behind the success of others, but ultimately you're gonna achieve or not achieve based on what you put in. And there's so many little slogans and stuff, going around. Michael Jordan about I've missed 1,000 shots in my life and da. But it's that review process and that application to go again and recognise what you need to do and apply it, which sets the players apart. We've had a few success stories in the academy, a few in the first team, a few that have moved on to other clubs. But what sets them apart is their attitude. I've worked with a lot of talented boys, probably more talented in some ways than the boys have ever made it here, but their attitude wasn't where it needed to be. I remember reading something not long ago about Ravel Morrison at Man United, and Sir Alex Ferguson's adamant he's the most talented player to have ever come out of Man United, but he's not hit the heights he's what was expected. So I think there's reasons for it.
It takes more than talent, right?
It does.
Yeah. I'm interested to pick up on this whole concept of ownership and stuff, because it seems like we're probably the right club to talk about that, and also with your plans moving forward with changing the curriculum and what it's going to look like. You work from, is it under 9s?
Yes.
Yeah. So how would that look in practice then, reality, from an under 9s compared to, say, under 12s or under 16s?
The biggest challenge is probably us as a senior management team, so to speak, people who write the program and share the vision of trying to impart this knowledge and philosophy onto the other coaches. So we've done it in little bits. I'll give you an example. So what happened? We had an under 10s team go out. And we played on the academy side. I think it was Swindon, and we had a player not turn up. So we were due to play 2 6v6 games. So we've got 11 players, and I'll say his name. His name's Jack Matthews. He was the coach, and he's the coach. And he gave the boys the option. He said, "Right, boys, we can either play 1 5v5 and 1 6v5, 6v6, or we can play a 6v6 and a 5 versus 6 against us on the other pitch." And all the boys said, "Right, we'll play a 5 versus 6 against us." And traditionally, people go, what are you doing? You set yourself up to fail and stuff. But the outcomes from it are massive, because tactically the boys have to think and try and problem solve and recognise what's in front of them and how they're going to deal with that. Socially, it's brilliant because they've made the decision to do that, and they feel like they've contributed towards the game plan. And again, it's not about the result, but the boys won. And it was really powerful because you got a part-time coach who's had the bravery and the confidence to go about, boys, look, is it this or is it this? Whereas you go back a few years, and I think everyone knows it. We're going to play a 5 versus 5, and we're going to play a 6 versus 5. 6 versus 6. What he had to do is let the opposition know of his intentions, and they agreed to it, of course, because it can be quite disrespectful if you're playing a man down. But the outcomes from it are massive, and if you compare it to a scenario that might come up in the future, they might be playing first team football and they get a man sent off in the first minute. They're going to have to deal with it. So again, it's about players recognising, right, what's the situation, what's in front of us, how are we going to deal with this? And it's not about the result, it's about the process and them going through it. If they'd lost, no problem. We'll still do it again when the time comes up. So to answer your question, the biggest challenge, I suppose, is recognising what age group needs what and when, and who's ready for what. Because again, all players develop at different rates, and for some are more ready than others, and that's quite obvious. So the biggest challenge is recognising who needs what. But we've not finished the process. We are still at the beginning stages of it, but we've, going back to my earlier point about the coaches and about the staff and the people, and having people in the building with a growth mindset and who are going to buy into your philosophy and your program. I think that's a great example of it happening. Yeah, for sure. Does it impact on the players you recruit and who you bring in? Yeah, definitely. Again,
Or should I say, does it also impact on the ones that stick it out and stay here, maybe? Because you're asking a bit more maybe than at some other places.
Yeah, I think when you're recruiting, it's difficult because, you know, you might be trialing a boy. I'll just give you an example. You might be trialing a boy who's never been on trial before, you know, so he's very nervous. It's a new environment, new situation for him. So, of course, you know, you can't expect from him to be performing how a boy who has been signed for X amount of years is performing. You know, it's very unrealistic. So, of course, ultimately they need raw footballing talent. You know, they need to be good movers. They need to be athletes and get around the pitch. And you're looking for personalities and players who have the potential to buy into, you know, the program. For some, you know, that could be after a couple of weeks. For some, it might be after a couple of months. You know, that changes. But what we have definitely seen is players who have come in and stayed in and gone through the program and coming out of it, the other end, tend to be players who take responsibility, take ownership of their own development. You know, when others are playing computers and chilling, you know, they're doing something that contributes towards their own development. And at the end of the day, it all adds up. You know, if I'm doing 5 minutes extra a day from you, you know, over a couple of months, you know, you're talking about hours. Yeah. So no, definitely boys who have succeeded in our program, they've definitely put more in. And that's the message we give to all our players and even to coaches, you know. Ultimately, your development is going to be dependent on what you put into it.
Yeah, of course. Do you have relationships with local grassroots clubs or feeder clubs do you have that? And if you do you find that some are a bit more aligned to the way you do things here and therefore those players transfer better into here, or is that not the case?
It's different. You know, we do have relationships with coaching companies and grassroots clubs. And we do have these discussions with the coaches, and you know they're very much into our idea and how we're doing it. Again, whether they implement it or not is a different story. And plus, the level of players they're working at is very different to ours. You know, we're very fortunate. We've got we haven't got players in enough. You know, we'd like them in more, but we have players in the building longer and more so than they have their players. You know, they might have 1 hour session a week. So you know, it's very difficult to try and give the boys what they need in impartial what we're trying to bring onto them in that amount of time. So I wouldn't say necessarily their boys transfer easier or quicker over to us because you know I think I don't think they've started the process, if I'm honest, or if they have, then they're at a different stage to it than what we are. But no, we do have relationships with local grassroots clubs and coaching companies, definitely.
Okay. And obviously a big part of football is the ability to play football and that technical ability to do the right things with the ball.
Yeah.
How do you focus on that in your sessions with the players? I mean, how much time is given to technical work as opposed to small-sided games, as opposed to kind of the other character building stuff?
I'm a massive fan of unopposed technical work, massive. But I think it's like with anything, it's how you do it. You know, I've seen unopposed technical sessions done really poor. I've seen opposed technical sessions done really poor. I've seen small-sided games, you know, they're happening, the boys are playing, they're getting touches, but, you know, they're not getting the outcomes needed. So I don't think it's necessarily what the session is. I think it's how it's done, if that makes sense. Yeah, planning and with understanding what you want to get out of it, I think that will enable you to get a lot closer to getting the session to where you want it to get to. I've seen many sessions and like I said to you, I think it's more about, you know, how the coach gets his messages across, you know, how he constrains the sessions to get his outcomes, rather it being at the actual practice itself. Having said that, though, you do see some practices that don't look anything like what they want it to look like, which obviously is a different conversation. But in terms of you know, what type of sessions, I think there's multiple ways of getting outcomes. It's just more down to how you get it across. Yeah,
for sure. And do you work for your age groups building around a set formation to when they get to the senior team, or is that down to the coaches at each phase? Or
again, it's down to the players and their needs. You know, right. So we don't have formations. If I'm honest, I think formations give you a good structure defensively because, you know, you have people in certain areas of the pitch and, you know, their roles and responsibilities is defined. But in terms of in possession, we're not massive on formations, you know.
So you don't look at the first team and think, well, we play that particular way now under this manager, and, you know, so therefore
we have done in the past. But if I'm honest, it doesn't work because you know, they're two different worlds. That they are in a results and performance business. They're trying to get results. They're trying to get points on the board. Plus, and not being rude, the management by the time these boys get to that level could be very different. So if a manager now plays a 4-4-2, in 3-4 years' time, you could be playing 3-5-2 or 4-2-3. We don't know. So if you're setting boys up for the future game, I think it's important you allow boys to experience as many different formations and strategies as possible, because you don't know what you're setting them up for. And to go back a bit, what formation do we play? It's dependent on the needs of the player. So I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, when I was taking the 16s, we played 4-2-3-1. It was quite predominant. But what I noticed over time was the centre forward struggled to play with another centre forward, basically because he'd been conditioned to play on his own and play with a 10 and play with two wide players. So was that positive? There are positives to it, but there are also negatives. So I think it just kind of reaffirms the point that the more you're stuck on formations, you're going to get outcomes, there's no doubt about that. But in terms of player development and stretching players and helping them maximise their potential, I think you're holding players back a lot. If you've got a centre back, for example, and he's used to having a fullback beside him and a centre back inside him, there are certain parts of the pitch that he's not really going to veer into. So if you played a 3-5-2, all of a sudden he has to go and defend in wide channels. He might be up against a tricky winger. He might be outnumbered sometimes. So he has to go through that process and that learning experience to make better decisions, to come out of it better the other end. So how he performs and does that at under 12s, under 13s isn't important. I think what's important is you give them as many different experiences and scenarios and situations as possible. So by the time they're 16, 17, 18, 19, going on even more, right, what's the situation? This is the situation. How do I deal with this? And they can kind of tap into their bank of knowledge and make decisions that they feel is right. I don't think you can have a formation.
What's your feelings around player rotation, and then when they might move towards something more specific?
Player rotation is massive. I don't know if people know, but we've got a bit of an identity at the moment where our players wear two different colour socks. So they have a blue sock on their stronger foot and a yellow sock on their weaker foot. Oh, right. And the reason for it is their aim is to, by the time they get to a scholarship, to have two blue socks. So the blue sock, the white sock in training or the yellow sock in games highlights their weaker foot. And we're trying to develop two-footed players. So the only way to do that is you have to rotate positions. You have to play players on their weaker side sometimes. In the past, you've had a few people, but won't you have opposition players forcing players onto their weaker foot?
That's what you want, right?
Is that bad?
Yeah.
Today they might fail, but tomorrow they'll succeed if you're patient and persistent with it. So in terms of player rotations, massive. The boys are learning the game. There's so many stories of players who played in X position but end up playing in another position. Edison's another one. I know it's a bit of a cheat, but he was centre midfielder and now all of a sudden he plays at the back, and we're talking about how well he distributes from the back and stuff. Well, he's had a development program to contribute towards that. There's so many examples of players who have played in a position and found their way in the game in a different position. So I think it's important, again, you go back and give boys as many different scenarios and situations as possible, rotate as much as possible. We become a little bit more position specific in the youth phase here.
Okay.
Not to say that a player, if he's a centre back,
under 12s, under 13s.
Yeah, under 12s, under 13s. Yeah, under 12s, under 13s upwards, we become a little bit more position specific in the sense that they then enter a position specific program where if we go, look, he has the skill sets of a centre midfielder, he would then start attending centre midfield position specific sessions, just to give him that little bit more development around, the requirements of the centre midfielder. However, that's not to say they won't rotate, and that's not to say they won't experience different playing positions, but it'd probably be less more so than younger age groups. Yeah. But if I'm honest, there are other clubs who they played multiple positions up to the age of 14, 15. They don't really look at positions.
Yeah. So a lot of our listeners, Michael, are in that kind of grassroots recreational space, and we try and be a bit selfish on this podcast and steal your wonderful ideas. I'll be interested to know, again, no pressure here, if you were in our shoes or if you were working at kind of our kind of club where we've got some great volunteer coaches that give up their time and are doing their best they can for the players they've got. If you were given any kind of tips, advice, or guidance, either to the coaches or to the players or to me, and how I can improve my sessions, what would be some of those kind of things you say, look, Scott, focus on X, Y, Z, because that's going to be the things that might have the biggest impact?
I've worked at grassroots level, and I come across a lot of good coaches that work at grassroots level, and your world is very different, and so I get it completely. Most grassroots clubs are in a league, so there are results on it. The biggest message I would say is, whatever your philosophy or idea is just be patient with it. Don't be swayed by a result that hasn't gone your way. And I know it's a lot easier said than done. I do get that. But I'd say be patient with what you want to get out of it and be relentless with it. I don't think there's anything worse than a coach that says, right, one day we're going to do this and we're going to play this way. And then 2 weeks later, you go, you still doing that? No, we've lost the last 2. I've changed it. Because the players can feed into that. The players can smell... I'm not going to swear, but they can smell the nonsense. Yeah, and it doesn't do anyone any favours. Plus, you also lose your own identity and your own focus.
So be patient. And you're talking, I'm assuming, not weeks, we're talking like months, if not years on stuff. Like, have a plan and just give it months to pan out. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. But understand what you're trying to achieve. Don't just go into sessions and, I haven't planned my session, I'm going to do this session today, because then you're not really hitting anything. So, map it out, understand where you want to get to, and make sure everything you do is geared towards your outcome. And be patient with it, be relentless with it, don't be swayed by it. What you might have to do is get your messages and not sell your idea, but definitely get buy-in from your parents and from your players, because if they're going to go through this process and, along the way suffer, then they have to believe in it. Just be patient and relentless. In terms of actual session designs, again, there's many ways to get the same message across. The safest one I would say is some form of game, only because everyone's involved and everyone's playing. That would be the safest one. I'm not saying to do that. Yeah. But in terms of improving self and improving your own knowledge and making sure you're on the right track and what you're doing is clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, so if you're my coach, I've got an under 11s team and you're the under 12s coach, for example, and me saying, Scott, come and watch my session for a bit. This is what I'm trying to get out of it. Can you give me a bit of feedback? Be open to the feedback. Be open to, it's not criticism, it's constructive feedback. Yeah. It's not advice. It's just, look, this is what I've noticed. It's feedback. Do something with it or don't. And just be patient with it and be open to having other people look into what you're doing, just to make sure you're on the right roads.
Good tips there. I'm having all of those. You mentioned about parents in that last bit, and I'm interested to know then how you communicate with parents. What's it like in practice? Because I know some academies, their communication channels are pretty open, and they're quite regularly in contact with the parents, and they use player reviews and all kinds of things. Other academies, you don't hear there's no contact at all. You just kind of get to know whether or not your kid's been kept on or not, maybe every few months. And I wonder how things are done here and the reasons behind that.
This season, we've worked with a consultant, I suppose it is, who works with, she's a psychologist who does work with the GB hockey team. So we've bring her on board as a consultant, where together, myself, James Langridge, who oversees the psychological program here, Jeremy and Mark, we've designed workshops where we bring parents in and we're trying to get them involved and up to date with what we're trying to do with the players. Ultimately, we have them, between 5, 7, 9 hours a week. All the other hours are spent with the parents. So if they're not on board and they don't buy into what you're trying to do, you could be losing the player. So there's no point us on a Sunday, they're with us and we're saying, do this and do that. Then they get in the car and the mum and dad goes, look, don't listen to him. They don't know what he's talking about. Give a different message. It can be very conflicting, and the only person who's going to suffer is the player. So we open our doors and we try and communicate as much as possible with our parents. It's probably not as much as we want, and we have plans in the future to try and increase the hours in which we contact and communicate with our parents. But we currently have a process in place where parents are welcome into our workshops, and we update them with what we're where we are with the program and what we're trying to do with the boys and changes the boys are going through. Just so they have a bit more buy-in, and the floor's open so they can ask questions, and conversations sometimes go off topic, but we find that powerful. But the more the parents can buy in and understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and the only person who's going to benefit from it is the player, because the messages they're going to be getting is consistent. So going back to ownership, we have little things in place where we try and get parents to, look, if little Johnny's going to turn up to training and forget his shin pads, and you've noticed he's left his shin pads, let him forget his shin pads. Let him turn up to training without his shin pads. Go through that process, because next time he's not going to forget his shin pads. Or the alternative is you pack his bag, you make sure his shin pads and his boots are in the bag. He turns up, and he gets used to you packing his bag every day.
Yeah.
Preparing food, for example, filling up water bottles, making just little things where we go, look, try and give your boy a little bit more responsibility in these areas, because the outcomes are, trust, by the time he's like 13, 14, he'll be doing it himself.
Self-managing.
He'll be self-managing, and just little things like that.
Which is great kind of life skill stuff, isn't it? Beyond the world of football, right?
Exactly that. And, don't get me wrong, ideally every boy that leaves us will become professional footballers. We're very, we're not stupid. Not every boy will become professional footballers. So what we hope is the boys go through our program and become better people, and they leave us as better people for it. And what we say to parents, is you're not going to be judged on if your boy is a good player and if he makes it as a professional. As a parent, you're judged on, how your son or your child conducts themselves, and has he got manners? How does he approach things? That's how you're going to be judged. Leave the playing side to us in a way, but ultimately, yes,
the coachability of the player is often in the parents' background.
He's a player. We're going to try and get him through the process, and hopefully we help him maximise his potential when he steps out one day and represents the first team. But if he doesn't, let's try and develop him as a person. So whatever he goes on and does in the future, he's got the life skills to go and succeed.
What about player reviews, Michael? Do you have them? Do you use them?
Yeah, we have player reviews every 6 weeks. You go back a few years, I suppose it was paper-based or PMA-based. Anyone that works in the academy knows what PMA is, which is basically it's an online portal where everything's stored. And we looked at it in the last 12 months or so and go, well, what you're losing, okay, yes, the information's there and the boys are getting their messages, for example, but what you're losing is that relationship, that communication. So we've kind of gone less PMA, less paper-based and more interaction meeting-based. So to give you an example, Rob, who looks after our 16s, he looks after the youth phase, so he's manager of the 16s, but he looks after the 13s to 16s. And what he's been doing, he's making sure every 6 weeks he has meetings with the players, and they look different from different times. So there might be him and the coach giving the player feedback. It might be a player feeding back to Rob how he's done, and with a little presentation how he's done and what he thinks he needs to work on. It looks different at different times, but basically, fundamentally, what it is it's a relationship. It's the boys having the floor space to talk, to communicate, to give their own input into their program and their development, whilst receiving it from their coaches. But that happens every 6 weeks in terms of progress, and then you do have parent and player reviews you get them twice a year, so Christmas and end of season, which is basically, look, these are targets that are in place that you need to try and hit to make sure, next season you're retained. And at the end of the season, naturally, you have your retained and release meetings where you let a player know whether or not he's been retained or released for the following season. Yeah. Which is part, it's unfortunate. It's part of the animal, I suppose.
It's part of it, isn't it? Right. Yeah. But again, it sounds like once, even with that particular tool, you're using it where possible for the players to take ownership again.
Definitely. Yeah. Absolutely. Like I said, we're at the beginning of the process, and how it looks and how it's going to end, we don't know. And we're still learning and developing the concept ourselves, but it's definitely the way forward. Don't get me wrong, there's going to come a stage and a time when a player, he's going to be led by a coach or a manager who is going to be, pretty commanding and direct, but then, if we can prepare players for that, give them the skill set to understand, that might be the future. However, there's a lot of outcomes and positives to you managing yourself and you recognising and so on and so forth. We feel it's the way forward.
And for you then, you've embraced this side of the player's development. Have you reached out to anyone that supports you? Any things you've come across around this player ownership stuff that you think's been useful, that you've picked up, that you've kind of taken stuff from?
Yeah, I recently went on CPD, which was hosted by Mark Bennett, who's an MBE. If I'm honest with you, I didn't really know who he was before I went on the CPD. So we work with our FAYCD, which is basically our coach educator, which is assigned to us by the FA. So Jeff Noonan's ours, and Jeff's very much aware of what we're trying to do here and develop, and so we have discussions all the time, and so he understands everything. And he emailed myself and said, look, Mike, whilst you're trying to develop this concept, there's a CPD in the local area to you. Myself, Mark and James, we attended, and if I'm honest, I'd never really heard of Mark before. I'd done a bit of reading leading up to it, and it sounded interesting, and it looked like an opportunity not to be missed. And no, it was really informative, and it was interesting, and you definitely took away a few bits from there. And there's definitely a few methods that he introduced that we're going to try and implement here, just to support further what we do.
It does sound like the work Mark does and his rule of three and stuff. That seems like an ideal fit for what you're doing here. Yeah. And, I mean, you're probably doing parts of it anyway, and certainly what you're booking moving forward. But I would imagine that's going to be really useful moving forward. Yeah,
we do parts of it. His is a little bit more structured. He has a process, like I said, so we're definitely going to start implementing some of his processes and structures, and to and like I said, going back to it, we are going to have to be patient and persistent with it. But there's no doubt, listening to him and seeing his outcomes, it has massive benefits, and it aligns itself massively with what we're trying to do here. It's
what you said at the beginning, I think, about, really our job as a coach is almost to try and remove ourselves as much in the process as possible, right? And give as much of it to the players and or the team as you can. And that rule of three will certainly do that.
Oh, definitely.
Michael, and then a couple of last questions, that's okay. Really, I'm interested to know just, what's influenced your coaching philosophy, because I know you've been on a learning journey, certainly since you've been at Wimbledon, but, just generally speaking, what would you say the main influences for you and where you are now, and why you've got to your mindset as it is now? What's influenced that?
What's influenced that? I think there's different things at different stages. So like I said, I was very fortunate. I worked at Millwall. I worked under some good quality youth coaches, one that sticks to mind. He's currently manager of Walton Casuals is Anthony Gale, who in terms of working with the younger age groups, he's one of the best I've seen in terms of relationships and communication and getting buy-in from the players. So he was a massive influence to me early on in my career. Then I was fortunate enough to work under Mark here, who is a very forward-thinking, innovative coach, and he's had a massive influence on myself. And since I've been in my role, 2017, my personal CPD has gone through the roof. So in 2018, I spent a week in Barcelona, went into La Masia, and sat down with some of the big head honchos there, and it's quite breathtaking. Yeah. Spent some time in Atletico Madrid also with the under-18s, and so I've been to Spain a couple of times. But alongside my role, I'm also on a development program myself. So to give an example, a few weeks ago, and this kind of buys into the player ownership stuff, we went to a school called Gladesmore Community School. Now, anyone listening, I recommend you go and Google it. It's quite remarkable. So they're slap bang in the middle of Tottenham. Right. And years ago, they were in the middle of the London riots. So in terms of, I wouldn't say poverty, but in terms of things they're up against,
the challenges.
They were right in the middle of it all. And and I think the stat was, in the local community, only 3% of the local community chose this school as one of their top 3 choice in the local community, even on their doorstep. And they've gone. He's took them from a school who no one wanted to go to now it's one of the highest achieving schools in the country, and it's deemed an elite performing environment. The head teacher there is called Tony Hartley. He's an MBE. Go and Google on YouTube. It's quite remarkable, their story, and I'm not doing it justice. When he's sitting there and he's telling you the stories, and we spent the whole day there. It was really breathtaking. But but fundamentally, what this school is also about is trying to develop students to never doubt themselves. To try and fulfill their potential and basically self-manage themselves, and never give up. So going back a bit, I've been very fortunate as part of my role that I'm on a coaching program that just really exposes me to all these different learning opportunities. Last couple of years I've been very fortunate. Kind of like what I said earlier, I would say to anyone, always look to go and learn and watch other coaches, and don't be scared to ask questions. Like I said, I went to a CPD a couple of weeks ago with Mark Bennett, which I didn't know what I was getting into, but without going there, I would never have known what I know now. And learning never stops. And that sounds really cheesy, but I've kind of learned, the more you think you know, the less you know. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And the more you find out,
the more you want to know.
Yeah. So even podcasts, I was never a massive podcast fan, funny enough, but over the last 12 months, I've started listening to podcasts when you're in the car. It costs nothing, instead of listening to music, listen to a podcast. 40-minute drive, all of a sudden, if you pick up one new thing that you didn't know, it's
time well spent, right?
Absolutely. And learning never stops. So, what influenced me, I think over the last few years, different things. I was quite fortunate to go to Eddie Jones and watch England national side train. That was breathtaking. I'm not a rugby fan. I have no idea what the rules of rugby are or anything, but to watch a coach, an elite coach, operating and performing, coaching's coaching ultimately. Just trying to expose myself to different learning opportunities and just keep learning.
It's great that you've taken some influences from different places there, and it's like with the rugby or with the school and stuff. I mean, it just shows you, doesn't it? There's different ways in which we can develop ourselves, even as in the world of football and soccer, from looking at other areas. Final question for me is just your future plans and hopes. What's your hopes? What's your plans moving forward from now?
Keep learning. Keep learning, keep developing. I'm on a 3-year course. Well, no, technically my course is 4 years because I started a year earlier. So I'm 2 years into a 4-year course. So I've still got another 2 years left of my head of coaching program, which I want to see it through because I think the learning opportunities that have come through that has been massive. Plus, like I said, it's not a role I anticipated I'd be on, but I'm kind of enjoying the process of going through my role and working with coaches and working with programs and writing syllabuses and stuff. So I'm learning a lot from that. So for the next 2 years, definitely see out my program and in year 3 or 4, see where that takes me. I don't know where the head of coaching program is going to sit once I've completed it. I don't think really anyone really knows, but I definitely want to complete it. Moving forward, long term, hopefully by then Wimbledon will be in the Premiership, and the world will look very different. You never know. But definitely short to medium term, just keep learning, keep developing, and enjoy. I do want to go back to working with players fundamentally, and don't get me wrong, I do miss taking teams and preparing teams for games and stuff. But I'm also enjoying my role and the process I'm currently going through. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't supposed to be this way, but it does seem appropriate that I think this podcast episode has turned into one about ownership. And what a cracking topic, do you think? And I think what a cracking place to talk about that with. I mean, let's be clear, there's loads of other stuff around here that's going on. I've seen it myself today, and obviously for the podcast, I'm sure some of that will come out. But there's loads. But I think if there's one thing right now that the ownership's probably, you're all over that, and that's a great thing for the listeners to pick up on. Hopefully, get some tips and guidance around that. Maybe what they can use in their own practices. Definitely. And I'm quietly convinced that I think with the Leyton Orient game that Mark set up without telling the players they were going to coach stuff, I reckon he paid the bus drivers to take the wrong turn. So. Probably. Because he's that forward thinking.
To be fair, that was only one game he'd done. They did do another. They've done 2 this season, right. and they've won the second game. But
maybe if I was the coach, I'd be getting worried.
Yeah, well, we've got a meeting next week. So,
Michael, thank you so much for your time. It's really appreciated. There's loads of stuff that for me to take away personally, and we're really grateful for your time. And maybe 6 months or a year's time again, if you're happy to come on and have a chat about how things are going, we'd love to hear how the new plan's panning out and what you've learned from it. I know these things are never a smooth journey, and there's always learns on the way, but that's part of it, right?
Definitely, 100%. We're more than privileged to do that.
Super stuff. Thank you so much. Okay, so that was an interview with Michael. What's your initial thoughts there, Mark?
I thought it was an excellent interview. Really, really, really good. Michael come across really well. As I said before, at the start of the show, I would have loved to have been there. I wish I could see the facilities and actually spoken to Michael kind of face to face, because I think it's not just those discussions that you catch on air. There's other little discussions you have before and after that are really interesting, right? So I wish I'd been there, but he come across really well. I just really engaging. You can feel like his passion for football just by listening to that podcast and not being there. So I thought it was excellent. I love the discussion around player ownership, and certainly there were some items in there around working outside the session, which I think we're gonna talk about as well now. But I thought it was really, really good, really, really good. How about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Like you say, I hopefully it came across during the interview like what it's like there, and it just seemed like Michael is the great fit, like for that, his temperament, his attitude, his philosophy, his approach to that particular club. Now, part of that's probably the time he's been there. But yeah, I mean, we've seen some academies at different levels, And I'm going to be perfectly honest with it. This isn't what we've seen at that, Category 1 kind of Premier League level.
Yeah.
But I think you get a lot out of what they've got there at AFC Wimbledon, You just feel it's a bit more rawer. Still very, very nice, don't get me wrong, but it just feels a bit more like, you know what, if you're going to come to play here, roll your sleeves up, get stuck in. There's going to be no, it's going to be all pretty and nice and all fluffy and pink. It's going to be like, you know what, you've got to go in and, you've got to earn your boots and you're going to have to work hard and do the right things. And there's been talk recently about how the academy system has maybe been a bit too nice for some players. It's certainly improved the UPP and there's lots of benefits there. But, if you make things too nice, when they're going to go and compete at a high level of football, are they, emotionally and psychologically and socially ready to be able to compete at that level?
Yes.
If their comfort has been too nice from under 9s up to under 16s. And, there is a step back there. I think at Wimbledon, what you get is, you get a bit more of that slight raw edginess, That's not to say that, there's still a lot of quality there and, there's lots of nice facilities and it's in a nice place. It's just feels a bit more like that.
Yeah.
But your 2 points, I think, was spot on. For me, what came out of this one, the big one was player ownership and the other one was kind of the work outside the session for both coaches and for both players. So, I mean, there's lots in here, but... should we ever talk about player ownership?
Yeah, let's do that because I think this is a really important part of coaching that, again, I think is a little bit kind of underestimated or it's not maybe adopted too much. But I think in a player-centred coaching environment, you want to have player ownership and player engagement in sessions. Now, I'm certainly not there in terms of having a lot of player ownership in my sessions. I try to have kind of bits and pieces here and there, but I think it's something I definitely need to work on. I recognise that and I reflect back and think, how can I have more player ownership in my sessions? But I think it's an important part. I think it just brings that whole engagement through, and you're kind of getting them to buy into the process as you're going through, right?
Totally agree. You want your if you want your players to go out and be able to deal with the unknown on a match day, they can't look to you every time they've got to make a decision, can they? Or they face some adversity.
Yeah.
So if you don't create that environment for them to be able to practice that ahead of the games, then you can't expect it, right? If you don't practice it, don't expect it.
Yeah.
So looking for opportunities in which to give the players ownership has to be an essential part of what you do as part of your training philosophy and approach. I mean, I can't remember what we covered in episode 1. We spoke about what ingredients make a good coaching session, but I'm sure player ownership would have been in there somewhere or as part of something else, if not directly, on its own. But it is so important. And I've seen some great coaches who I would say probably are a little bit more like the old school version, where it's very much the coach-led, play, stop, I'll tell you what to do, good information, all that and stuff, and then you go and do what I've shown you or demonstrated or told you to do, and then we'll be successful.
Yep.
And that can work to a level, but if you really want the best out of your players, then them having the ability to best make those decisions internally and work for themselves and fix it either independently or with their teammates before they come to the coach has got to be a good thing.
Yeah.
So the challenge for us is how do we pick that up in training to at the various age groups and stages to kind of develop that to a level in which it's going to transfer into a match, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I actually think there's two things to this. I think it's not just training. I think it's also in your matches as well. How can you bring ownership into match day? And there's some things that I've started trying to do over the last, I would say, only the last couple of months, to try and get that bit more engagement at half time or full time or before the game. But I think we can come back to the matches. But in terms of training, so what are the kind of things, some examples that you would do in terms of giving player ownership in training at the moment? And bearing in mind you coach under sevens.
Yep.
So maybe one could argue if you've got an older age group under 14s or something like that, perhaps you would have different types of ownership or more ownership into those sessions than you would under sevens. Maybe you would argue actually it would be the same. I don't know.
I think there's some things that will be consistent. Other things you could probably do more as the players get a bit older. But let's go from youngest ages then. So, I mean, we do. I think I do some of this stuff, but I could certainly do more of it. Yep. So little things like they are responsible for getting the equipment in at the end of the sessions. 100%. Yes. I could do it, but they get it in. Yep. And you got a player that gets the balls, player gets bibs, player gets the cones, and they get it in, and it's in the right orders, and it's piled up right, and it's put away in the right places.
Yep.
Now, that's not a big deal, but these are under sevens, right? So let's put it in that. But that's something, right? So they own the equipment, they put it away, and they don't just get it and dump it down. They put it in the right orders. The cones are color coded back up and things like that. So a little bit of that. Bibs back in the bib bag, balls back in the ball bag. Yep. And they've each got a role to do that, usually with a partner.
Yep.
I try and, if we can, get them to decide on the teams. Yep. So if we're going to play a 3v3, 3v4, okay, I need 3 oranges, 3 reds, and a magic man or whatever else, and they sort it out. I'm not doing that. You sort it out among yourselves, and they need to choose a keeper. Have your team talk, choose your positions. As much as we can do that in training, I try and do it. So again, little things, but it hasn't got to be my plan where I want player A and B together and I want against C and D. It doesn't matter. The different challenges whoever they play against anyway.
And in that situation, if the teams were maybe not fair, would you step in or would you just let them play?
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's funny. Because I think when we had the current under-10s, we worked together with them a lot. Yeah. Part of our planning for the session would be often looking at the teams and making sure they were fair and balanced. Yeah. But that's not what happens on a Sunday game, is it? Exactly, firstly, for us, it was like so. Why have it fair and balanced? So I and I think it's where I've got better as a coach, that I don't need that full control over it all now. So if the teams end up working out that the strongest 3 players, and we got 1 or 2 that are most weeks are stronger than others, but actually that can change as well on its day, can't it? But let's just say for whatever reason the strongest 3 or 4 are playing against the not the strongest 3 or 4 that day. Well, then I'll see what the session is and how it's going. But maybe that is the challenge for the day. Yeah. Right? How can you deal with that? Yeah. You're 4 down now. What are you going to do about it? You need to find a new solution, don't you, to the problem. Yeah. Now, if it's undermining the theme of the session, or it's not working, or it's gone too far, then of course we'll switch a bit round. No, it'll be done in a way that's I usually always say, don't worry too much, we're going to mix up anyway, and either do or don't, because if you do, you do, and if you don't, you don't, and the players aren't expecting it. Yeah. But I think where before I was precious about that kind of stuff, I think we were, I'm certainly not that precious about it anymore, and I quite like the fact that it's one less thing for me to think about. Yeah, I agree. And like the challenge is a challenge, and deal with it. And actually, you know what? If the 3 players on that particular answer are strong and they're struggling against the 3 that are strong, well, what a lesson it is for those, a lesson it is for those to kind of, I'm going to, because I might face this player on Sunday, and actually I'm better at dealing with it now because I've had to deal with it today. Yeah,
it's a great opportunity for them to dig in, test their resilience, where they do it. Yeah. But also, I think from a coaching standpoint, I totally agree with what you say. Actually, we used to get pretty hung up on making sure the teams are very fair. Generally now, I just let the boys choose the teams as well. Just get the teams together. But I think the challenge then, from a coaching standpoint, is if a team is too strong, actually, can you then start to challenge them to do something else, or just maybe put some conditions in that would support the session, but maybe make it a bit more kind of even up? Or do you just leave it and just challenge the other team? You got to step up, and you've got to produce what this team are producing.
I think what I would do in that situation is I would be complimentary of the team doing well and the things they're doing well. So let's say Oranges are dominating Blues. Okay, Blues, what are Orange doing really well? Well, they're working hard. They're moving the ball quickly. They're working off. Well, they're talking to each other. Okay, well, can we do that? Yes, we can. If that wasn't enough to neutralise it a little bit, what I might do quietly is set Oranges a challenge quietly without the other players knowing, kind of thing. So they don't really aware of it. And I might say to if there's one particular player dominant or something else, then we'll just try and say, okay, can we keep playing but play 1-touch finishes, or can we all 3 of us get a touch of the ball before we get the shot away or something? So you kind of balance it in a way that's not undermining anything. The Blues don't know that anyway, but the Blues again see good practice. Brilliant. What a lesson for the Blues. Let's see how these 3 players are doing the thing together. And it's funny because you're right. Sometimes you do get. It can often depend on the theme of the session, depending on how the little mini teams click together, right? Because actually you've got some players that are great if it's more about beating players and 1v1 and dominating that way. Some players are great at sharing the ball. Some players are great at tackling and winning the ball back. So the dynamic of the team you've got together would vary. It's not like the same 3 or 4 players would dominate every week if they were together. The theme might change that as well. But I guess it's just embracing the challenge of that group, and that's what happens on matches, right? You don't know what the other team's going to be like on the day. You may even know the team, but you don't know how they're going to play. You might know how they're going to play technically and tactically, but you don't know how they're going to play physically or emotionally. But psychologically, you just don't know what they're up for that day. So you kind of think, well, actually, we've got to deal with all these things. Yeah. And under an overload, we used to be hung up on making sure, if we've got 12 players, it's 6 aside, we're fine. If someone calls in sick that day, what do we do? Okay, so you play 6v5. Yeah. Great challenge. Yeah. What's the problem with that? Yeah. Well, we've got a play list. Deal with it. Off you go. Yeah. If you keep mine, I'll give you 2 players less. Is that what you want?
No, I agree. Well, how about the situation where you've got players that would choose to be on the same team as the same players every week? So in my team, if we're doing a 3-a-side kind of matches and we got 12 players, then you often find that the same 3 would choose each other. The same 3 would choose each other. So sometimes I would then say to the boys that I don't want to see the same teams you had last week, or earlier on in the session you need to have a different team.
Okay.
So things like that. Was that something you would address, or would you be just quite happy for that to continue?
So I think, and I've seen a bit of that with young ones, because they'll gravitate to the inverted commas strongest players. Yeah. Throw 3 orange bibs out there. Yeah. That A wants to play B and wants to play with C because they're the 3 strongest players in inverted commas. With our current under 7s, that would happen a lot in the first probably month, 2 months or so. And I would make a point of saying, why did you choose player B? Why did you choose player B? He's really good. Yeah. They say that when they don't care, in front of the other boys at that age, they've got no inhibitions about saying what they think. All right, so you want an easier game than do to pick a strong player. Okay, that's interesting. I've noted that now. Okay, so you're going to have that easier. Okay, because that's what you want. You don't want to challenge yourself and play with someone else and you want that player. Okay, it's interesting. I've made a note of that. Yeah. And I'll let them play it still, and I guarantee, give it another 2 or 3 weeks, and then the next week, bet that player picks a different player to play with. And also what happens is, funnily enough, because then what you'd also see is they don't dominate as much. And the other team they think aren't so strong suddenly actually do quite well. They was actually, you know what, maybe I made a mistake, and they realise it's nonsense. And you'd hope in your team you've got that, like, generally speaking, it's relatively even anyway. But I think, especially younger ages, that it varies so much from week to week that it doesn't become a problem. But what I'd like the players to recognise is you can take the easy path if you want to then and pick player B every week to play alongside, who'll go and get the goals and dominate for you, or you can challenge them and play against player B and see how good you are then. And without being kind of that explicit about it, I'm certainly implicit about that, and I have been from the beginning, and I think it's worked.
That's a very good point, actually. Very good point. So, other things in terms of player ownership in the session?
I think a big one that coaches could do, and I wanted this with the younger ones as they get a bit older, is I think give them part of the session.
Okay.
I honestly do. The other thing they do is that they tell me their challenges. So they come with their own challenges. I
saw that the weekend, actually.
Yeah. One of our players Harry came and told me his 5 challenges for the tournament for the weekend. I never even asked him to do that, and he came and told me what his 5 challenges are going to be for himself for that weekend. Yeah. I mean, he's 6 years old, or he's 7 years old now. Yeah, I think he's turned 7. Yeah, but he's just turned 7, and he's coming to me and telling me what he's challenged himself, 5 challenges for the weekend for his football. How much music to your ears as a coach, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's brilliant. Anyone player of the tournament as well. I'm not saying the challenge made him
but
play the tournament. But
but when you've got that accountability about your own performance at 6 years old, or 7 years old, I mean, that's impressive, right? Just to have that mindset at that age group. And I'm going to take some credit for the environment we've created, but make no mistake, this comes down to everything, including him, his parents, and everything else. Because he's not the only one. All the boys I'd say are there or thereabouts on that level. But he was the one that come up and articulated that on Saturday morning before the game started and wanted to share. He's a shy boy as well. He wanted to share his challenges with the other players as well. So this is the other side to this whole football development thing that comes out. So Michael's points that came up lots of times during the interview was about player ownership, and you can certainly start it early. And again, I say it's quite a lot, but I think one thing we can be guilty of, generally speaking, as coaches, is we sell the players a bit short. I think they can do a lot more if we ask them to, in a positive, kind of supportive, encouraging environment. They can do more, and making them feel a bit uncomfortable is all right in a nice way. As long as they know that you care, I think that's absolutely fine. But so for the slightly older ones, I was going to quickly say is, I think only part of the session, especially the warm up. Why not? They could come if it's me and you in the same team, and coach says to me, right, Scott, you're doing this session next week. You've got a week to prepare for the warm up. Do a fun game. You've got 10 minutes with the players. Pick something fun and do something brilliant. A bit of pressure on me, a bit nerves. I've got to think about. I've got to talk to my parents maybe, or get a book out, or do something, or YouTube a video. Come with the game. It could be an absolute disaster. roster. That doesn't matter. It's the learn, right? It's the thing. It's the whole. And then they got to deliver it on the day. They got to come and turn and get the equipment out and set up. I think and even you're not doing the warm up for the warm up sake. You're doing it for the whole experience. How the other players deal with being led by being led by Scott that week, who's maybe quite quiet, or maybe he's a strong cat. You just don't know.
Yeah.
But I just think looking for ways in which you can give that to the players is great. And I think what Michael said about how, I think it was Mark Robinson who, they were doing the game and they didn't turn up with the coaches and they had to self-manage themselves, and I would think, brilliant,
Great idea,
But if I'm honest with you, that should almost be the norm. That the more we can remove ourselves from the process, I think the better, Be as involved as much as you have to be, but as little as possible.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it comes down to the engagement. I think you've got the more player ownership you have, the more engagement you have in the sessions and things like that. But outside of that as well, I think you're also helping players for just life in general, because you're giving them ownership, you're putting them outside their comfort zone because maybe they're not comfortable to lead the group, but you're putting them in that position where they are then going away learning things and bringing it back, and probably most of the time it's going to be a success. It's going to go really well because their teammates want them to do well, so they'll probably do well. So I think it's I think it's good, and but I think the challenge is for coaches is it's that little bit more work. I think how do you bring it into the session? That's the challenge from a coaching standpoint. It's that bit more work for coaches to do.
Michael mentioned about the Mark Bennett presentation that he went to,
yes,
which was great, and he was honest enough to say that he hadn't heard of Mark before, and he obviously learned a lot on the presentation. And Mark's, along with other things, I know, has got that rule of 3.
Yes,
and I think the reality to that is you're dead right. From the outset, it's harder work to get that in place.
Yeah.
But for the longer term, I think that makes life easy for you, doesn't it? Yeah. Once you get it there. So once the players understand, okay, first responsibility to correct my performance, or once you've agreed what acceptables are and unacceptables are and all that kind of stuff around it, but then you think, okay, the first thing is, okay, it's on me as the player. Then second, it's on the team. And then thirdly, it's on the coach to come and intervene, which is great. So you've always got that safety blanket there, but the more you can put it on the individual and the team to correct the things first, I just don't see how you wouldn't have a more successful team if that wasn't the mindset and the approach that they've got to it. But you're right, it's not easy, especially if you pick it up later, if you pick it in up at under 12s, 14s, 16s trying to do these things. Yeah. I've got no excuses with the younger teams. I've got, got 10 years here to kind of get these things right. Yeah. But the more we drop those stuff in now, and I've got some bigger plans for under 8s next season, and we'll talk about that maybe at another podcast and how they're going, and they could crash and burn. But certainly around leading on warm-ups, certainly around taking more responsibility for the lineups, so around formations, that kind of stuff. And, again, ultimately that could well cost us results of games, but the learn out of that whole experience is more important to me and hopefully the players than anything else.
Yeah. So how about, I think these are all great points, so how about match day then? What kind of things, and there's a few things that I do, but what kind of things would you think about on a match day kind of
this is when my true colours come shining through, because that's where I crash and burn on match days. I'm still very much about, I really struggle to give up control of the matches. I'm so, the organisation, the planning and stuff, I feel like the players get a lot in training about that side of it all. But in the matches, it's not like, I don't think it's the coach show, and I still think, but I'm there, I've organised the formation, the lineups and things like that. And I encourage, we mix things around in the sense where they play, but it is still very much coach led on the match day. And I've got more work to do on that. If I'm going to make an excuse, and it probably is an excuse more than it is a reason, I think the age of the players, I still feel like they need to protect them a little bit, and I need to just come. And also because we've had some experiences with the older players that haven't always been as positive on match day. I still feel like, I'm not as comfortable releasing some of that freedom around that unknown environment when half of that is down to somebody else, and sometimes that other half isn't always as pleasant as you'd want it to be. They're not on the same page that we are, and also we don't always get it right ourselves. So I haven't done enough as the answer, and I'll be interested to know what your thoughts were.
I think I'm probably similar. I don't think I've done enough, and I need to do more. Especially bearing in mind I've got an under 10s team at the moment. Now, I think from my standpoint, a few things I've done, and one thing I've done, and this is more around friendlies. I don't do this in our kind of competitive matches, which are not meant to be competitive, if you get my drift. I've kind of just said to the boys, right, you go and choose the formations. You choose. Sorry, not the formation. We have the formation. You go and choose which positions you play in. And
Does that include subs?
That includes subs, yeah. So we've had the we play the game into the quarters, and for each quarter you go and choose, this is the way you would like to play. You talk about it as a team, and then you come back to me and say, this is what we've got. Sometimes I've had to go and intervene a little bit and help facilitate from at times, but in general it's kind of worked quite well. Now I haven't done that a lot. I've only done it once or twice when we've played kind of friendly matches, but it does work. It does work quite well actually, and you can really see them getting engaged around the tactics board, talking about different positions and things.
Do they say things like, "Oh, you're the best left midfielder, you're the best front player, so you go and play there"? Is that how it goes?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. Sometimes I've kind of conditioned it to say you can't play in your kind of strongest position.
Okay.
Because we're a bit more in the under-10s, we're a bit more structured in terms of positions. We still try to rotate where we can, but we're not quite as rotate in every position. So we do say, don't play in your strongest position. So then that kind of puts that kind of argument or discussion to one side. But yeah, I think it's worth doing.
But it's a huge thing. I wonder if that is an exception to the rule. My gut feeling is it probably is, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess the real test for us as coaches is how much we relinquish that match day stuff.
Yeah.
More. And I've got a long way to go on that one.
Yeah.
But and also you want to do it in a way that you're not throwing them under a bus, isn't it?
Agreed.
And because you don't know what you're facing half the time, you don't know how big that bus is going to be. So it's harder, isn't it? Maybe it's a case of going in and having that dial again, where you can do a bit more if the game allows or the opponents allow. Exactly. And this is where the collaborative training matches thing is a good idea, in the sense that you kind of have that and the outset, so you're not going in blind on these things.
Yeah. And to be fair, when I've done that, I've done it against teams which I know we will be kind of competitive against, and I'm familiar with them exactly. Yeah. I probably wouldn't necessarily do it against a team that I don't know, and that's not because I don't want to win the game. It's nothing to do with that. I just would like the game. I think the game still needs to be an element of. It still needs to be competitive, if that makes sense. Yeah. We still need to be.
There's so many variables, isn't there? That if you have too many variables on match day, in training you control 100% of it. Only you got 100% of the control of the training environment within reason. Do you know what I mean? It's in your domain. Yeah. On match day, the best you've got is half of that, right? Because you've got the opponent, so the best you've got is half. Yeah. So the more you release of that half, you are slightly skating on thinner ice.
The other things as well that I've started to do, which I found quite interesting, is at half time or sometimes in between the quarters, and again at full time, I kind of ask the players to just take a minute to have a little chat and come back and speak to me, tell me what they think of the half or of the quarter or of the game. I then ask them if we got our kind of challenges for the day, how we're doing against those challenges.
I think that's a really good one, Mark, and I think that sets a lot about the environment. I try and do something similar with the younger ones, in the sense that team talks are always started by them. Yeah. Always start with them. So how are we doing? And so they know that actually it's not me and my opinion first. How, tell me what you think first, and we'll go from there. Again, I can get better at it, and I could certainly shut up more and let them have a longer chat about things. And when you've got a minute or two between the quarters or the halves, you kind of rush things along. But I certainly try and make an effort, and I think I do this more times than I don't. Is it starts with them, so they know they're going to be asked their opinion, they're going to ask what their thoughts are and stuff. So they're getting that brain working, and we see what their mindset says. And not only because then it shows them that it's not all about us as the coaches, also we're getting them thinking, right? And they're getting that habit of actually having to come to the huddle with some ideas.
Well, I think it goes beyond that, actually. I think it's not just a case of they come to the halftime or the huddle with ideas. Actually, during the game, they're starting to think about things. Oh, this isn't going so well. What are the opposition doing well? What do we need to do to kind of stop them, or to kind of...
rather than it be like, well, what's Mark going to tell me at the end of the half that I need to do better? Yeah. So I actually let me think about it now, because he's going to ask me what my answer is to the problem, not tell me what his answer is to the problem. Yeah. Good points. And the second thing we were speaking about on this that came was about the work outside the session.
Yes.
Which came out a lot with it from Michael, and what they're doing there at Wimbledon and the other things. Both for the players and the coaches, right? Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
So I think. If we just take the coaching one first, I think it's critical, right? You can go on, you can do your level 1, level 2, you can do level 3, you can do your badges. I think as a coach, it's just this continual learning is critical. Listening to great podcasts like this is a great start. I think planning for your sessions, there's so many books. I think just really keep just keep trying to learn new things. And I think the other big thing is reflecting on a session. Did it go well? Did it go not so well? What could you do? And even trying to write down your thoughts so that maybe 3 months later you come back and you're doing the same topic. You can look at that session plan you had, and you could look at your reflection after, and then you remember, oh yeah, that didn't go so well, I can do this. So I think, like, definitely from a coaching standpoint, it's all about just keeping that learning process going all the time. Yeah, all the time. And there's so much out there that you can learn. You could be doing it 24 hours a day. There's so much out there, but I think you just got to keep learning.
It's what Stuart Armstrong said, I think, in this episode with us, where he said about, like, the question really is there a better way? Yeah. So if you constantly ask, is there a better way? If you're always asking yourself that question, then I think you know what you're doing all right, aren't you? Yeah. Because, like, you just don't settle for what you're doing. Like, could I do it better? Is there a better way of doing the warm-up, the session plans, the player profiles, a better way of communicating the interventions, constantly asking those questions and listen to people. When you say about the podcast that this is just our views and our thoughts, and if nothing else, good, bad or indifferent, hopefully gets people thinking, right? And that's, I mean, I'd love to hear people's thoughts around is there a better way to give player ownership? I'd love to know what other people are thinking, because I'm sure there is, and we're doing in other ways we could do these things. So, please do email us or tweet us how you handle these things and what you do around player ownership and work outside the sessions. What about players then?
I think that it's the same. I think players need to be doing work outside of sessions. Now, whether that's homework you've set them, little challenges that you've set them, I think it's just critical. Even to the point, like at home, I think we've generally got football in every room in our house, which drives my wife around the bend. But my two boys are always kind of kicking a ball, right? They're just getting that touch, that learning. I think it comes back to the podcast with Saul around getting that feel for the ball all the time, getting that not necessarily technical groove in, and it's not opposed, but they're just little
natural
touches.
To have,
yeah. Like my youngest is doing a Maradona in the front room or something like that. It's just always just on the ball learning. I know not everyone in life is about football, but just little things like that. I think it really helps. Just doing a lot of work outside of sessions. Yeah,
and it can be other stuff as well, can't it? It can be hitting tennis balls. Yeah, it definitely. Can be riding the bike, skateboarding. Yeah, swimming. Yeah, even playing FIFA. We've said it before on the PlayStation. So you kind of think all those little things do add up, don't they? So the more you put into it, there's no silver bullet for this stuff, is it? It's just about time, effort, quality training, quality time.
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree.
All right, so hopefully a good episode. Hopefully you enjoyed the interview with Michael. He was fantastic. We're really, really grateful. And the plan is to go back and see him hopefully 6-12 months' time and find out how his new curriculum's getting on, how they're doing it in the sense of handing over that player ownership, where they've moved away from maybe that 6-week block kind of linear approach to a more non-linear way of doing things. We're very grateful for him, and we will do an update at some point.
Yep.
Two big things for us around player ownership and working outside the session with the coaches and the players. Love to get the thoughts back on player ownership and what other people are doing around that.
Yep.
I think the one thing that Michael did say that I thought was interesting was trying to create an individual mindset in a team sport. Which I think is true, because I think football is very much an individual sport. It's lots of individuals playing collectively, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think that was the lessons for me, really.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
I'm not going to spring this on you now, because you probably haven't planned this one or thought about it. Do you know what I'm going to ask you for?
You're going to ask me for the podcast details? Or
No, before that. No, even though you really are going to be surprised.
Tell me.
You're supposed to do the final thought this week.
I did. Yes, I did.
I've got one if you want me to do it.
You do it this week. I promise you I'll do it next week.
It came to me and I heard it. I can't remember. I might have been on another podcast. I can't remember. I'll try and find out where I heard it from, because I'm not going to steal other people's quotes. But I thought it was a great one-liner.
Yeah.
And it just said it's talking about coaching at the foundation youth development phase. And the coach said, you've got to understand, we are not here to win games.
Yeah.
As a coaches. And it just kind of was like a little switch in my head. Yeah, that's exactly it. We are not here to win games. If I'm going to coach your kid, I'm not going to coach them to win games. I'm going to coach them to be the best players they can be at the age that they are. Yep. And I just think it's a little bit of a light bulb moment for me, because if you can get that message across to the players and the parents, you feel a bit of pressure off you. Yeah. I'm not here to coach you in games, because if I was, some of the choices I might make might not be in the better interest of your development. Yes. So my thought here as a coach, particularly those that work in the foundation youth development phases, I know we know it, and I know a lot of coaches know it already, but be brave enough to say, look, I'm not here to win games. What I'm here to is develop your son and daughter the best I can possibly do that.
Yeah.
And some of those decisions will be based on long-term development as opposed to what the result on Saturday or Sunday or the midweek.
Yeah. And just to clarify, you want your players to still go and want to win the games.
100%. That's their responsibility. This is me. I am not here to win your games. You are. 100%, and I'm not going to change it. It's a support, it's competitive, 100%. But that's not my priority. My priority is about that. And also, you're right to mention, Mark, what we're using winning there based on the result. There's other ways we can win. We can win games in many different ways. But if we're talking about the result as the winning thing, then that's not what I'm here to do. And I think if parents understand that and players understand that, my job is to develop you. Your job is to want to go and win, and everything else. My job is to develop you. And from the parents' perspective, it's the case of them, well, okay, how can I support the coach with their messages and the player with their desires in the right way that's going to mean that kind of triangular approach means that the players get the best possible experience and the best opportunities to grow and develop.
Yeah.
Saved your butt there, boy, haven't I?
You did, yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. So have I got to do 2 now? 2 on the trot?
At least, I think. 4. I think we should compound interest this one up. All right. Well, thanks so much. I hope that's been interesting, guys. You can reach us at... Go on, you must know the Twitter one.
At the Soccer Coaching Cast. Soccer Coach Cast.
Soccer Coach Cast, well done. And the email address? info@thesoccercoachingpodcast.com. We've had loads again. Thanks very much. We won't do it now because it's already way too long this episode. But in the next one, we'll pick up all our thank yous and we'll deal with any kind of feedback or input we get around any previous episodes, or particularly around this one around player ownership. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what you do for the age groups that you work at.
And we'll come back to the formations as well. We've had a few things on the formations.
Definitely. Yeah. All right, brilliant. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks, Mark.
Perfect. Thank you.